In the hills of southeastern Turkey, beneath layers of earth and centuries of silence, lies something that should not exist. Something that challenges everything we thought we knew about our ancestors, about civilization itself, and about the very timeline of human achievement. What if I told you that while your history textbooks claim humanity was just learning to plant seeds and tame wild animals, our ancestors were already building temples more magnificent than anything Europe would see for another 7,000 years? This is the story of Göbekli Tepe, a name that rolls off the tongue like an ancient incantation, meaning belly hill in Turkish. But don't let that humble name fool you. What lies beneath this unassuming mound has archaeologists questioning everything they thought they understood about prehistoric humanity. We're talking about massive stone pillars, intricately carved with symbols and creatures, arranged in perfect circles that seem to map the very cosmos above. And here's the kicker: this entire complex was built 11,000 years ago, making it older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than the wheel itself. But that's just the beginning of this mystery. Because the more we dig, the more questions arise. Who built this place? How did hunter-gatherers, people we assumed lived in small nomadic bands, organize the massive workforce needed to quarry, carve, and transport stones weighing up to 50 tons? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why did they deliberately bury the entire complex, erasing it from history until a German archaeologist stumbled upon it in the 1,990 seconds? Tonight, we're going deep into the enigma that is Göbekli Tepe. We'll explore the revolutionary discoveries that are forcing archaeologists to rewrite the textbooks, the mysterious symbols carved into stone that might represent humanity's first attempt at recording cosmic events, and the growing evidence that this site wasn't just a temple, it might have been the birthplace of civilization itself. By the time we're done, you'll understand why this discovery is being called the most important archaeological find of our lifetime, and why some researchers believe it holds secrets that could change everything we think we know about human history. So settle in, because this journey takes us back to a time when the world was young, when massive stone circles rose from barren hillsides, and when our ancestors looked up at the stars and decided to build something eternal. The story begins not with ancient priests or forgotten kings, but with a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt, a man whose life would become forever intertwined with the stones of Göbekli Tepe. Picture this: it's 1994, and Schmidt is trudging across a dusty hilltop in southeastern Turkey, following up on a brief archaeological survey from 30 years earlier that had noted some interesting stone fragments. Most archaeologists might have seen scattered limestone blocks and moved on, but Schmidt possessed something rarer than academic credentials. He had vision. The moment Schmidt laid eyes on those weathered T-shaped stones protruding from the earth, he knew his life had just changed forever. In his own words, "As soon as I got there and saw the stones, I knew that if I didn't walk away immediately, I would be there for the rest of my life." And he was right. Schmidt would spend the next 20 years of his existence uncovering what he called a Stone Age zoo, a complex so vast and sophisticated that it would challenge every assumption about prehistoric humanity. What Schmidt discovered defied logic. Here, on a barren limestone plateau at the highest point of the Germish mountain range, stood massive stone pillars arranged in perfect circles. These weren't crude markers or simple standing stones. They were masterpieces of prehistoric engineering and artistry. The largest pillars tower over 17 feet high and weigh up to 50 tons each. To put that in perspective, that's heavier than most modern buildings are designed to support, and these stones were being quarried, shaped, and positioned by people who supposedly hadn't even invented the wheel yet. But the scale was just the beginning of the mystery. As Schmidt's team carefully brushed away millennia of accumulated earth, intricate carvings began to emerge from the stone. Serpents slithered across pillar faces in relief so detailed you could count their scales. Wild boars charged across limestone surfaces with tusks bared and muscles rippling. Vultures spread their wings in death poses that seemed to watch visitors with hollow eyes. Foxes, lions, gazelles, and creatures that defied easy identification populated this stone menagerie, all rendered with an artistic sophistication that shouldn't have existed for thousands more years. Each circular enclosure seemed to have its own animal theme, as if different groups or clans had claimed their own sacred space within the complex. In Enclosure A, serpents dominated the imagery. Enclosure B belonged to the foxes. Boars ruled Enclosure C, while birds of prey claimed Enclosure D. This wasn't random decoration, it was systematic, organized, purposeful. These hunter-gatherers weren't just surviving, they were creating art, developing complex symbolic systems, and organizing their spiritual world with a sophistication that challenged every assumption about prehistoric cognitive development. And then there was the engineering marvel of the construction itself. The limestone used for these monuments wasn't some soft, easily worked material. This was hard, crystalline stone that required serious skill to shape. Yet somehow, using nothing more than flint tools and wooden implements, these prehistoric architects managed to create pillars with surfaces so smooth they seem almost polished. The precision of the carving work rivals anything produced by later civilizations with metal tools and generations of accumulated expertise. But perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of Göbekli Tepe isn't what was built, it's when it was built. Carbon dating and geological analysis have confirmed what Schmidt suspected from the beginning. This complex predates agriculture, predates pottery, predates the domestication of animals. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers, nomads who followed herds and gathered wild plants. According to everything we thought we knew about human development, these people should have been focused on basic survival, not constructing massive religious complexes. Yet here's the evidence, carved in stone and buried under centuries of earth. Tens of thousands of animal bones found at the site confirm that the builders were indeed hunters. Over 60% of the bones belonged to gazelles, with the remainder coming from wild boar, deer, and various bird species. No domestic animals, no evidence of agriculture, just wild game hunted by people who somehow found the time, organization, and motivation to create one of humanity's first monumental architecture projects. The implications are staggering. If hunter-gatherers could organize the massive workforce needed to quarry 50-ton stones, transport them across rugged terrain, and arrange them into precise astronomical alignments, then our entire understanding of prehistoric social organization needs to be reconsidered. We're not talking about a few dozen people working together. Moving stones of this size would have required hundreds of workers, all needing to be fed, housed, and coordinated over periods that likely stretched across generations. Schmidt realized he was looking at evidence of something unprecedented, complex social organization among hunter-gatherers, on a scale that shouldn't have been possible, according to conventional archaeological wisdom. The construction of Göbekli Tepe would have required not just massive manpower, but sophisticated planning, hierarchical organization, and the ability to sustain large groups of people in one location for extended periods. In other words, it required civilization, but civilization that emerged thousands of years before civilization was supposed to exist. And we've only scratched the surface, literally. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetic surveys reveal that what Schmidt uncovered represents less than 10% of the total site. Beneath the earth lie at least 16 more circular enclosures, each potentially containing dozens of massive carved pillars. The full extent of Göbekli Tepe may not be revealed for another century of careful excavation, but what's already been uncovered is enough to revolutionize our understanding of human prehistory. The more Schmidt and his team excavated, the more impossible Göbekli Tepe became. Every new discovery deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Take the quarrying operation alone, these weren't people casually picking up convenient stones. The builders had deliberately chosen specific limestone deposits scattered across the plateau. some located over 500 meters from the construction site. They had developed systematic methods for extracting massive blocks from the bedrock, using wooden wedges and flint picks to cut precise channels that would allow entire pillars to be lifted free from the earth. But here's where it gets truly bewildering. When archaeologists examined the quarry sites, they found something extraordinary: a pillar that was never finished. Lying there in the bedrock, still partially attached to the stone matrix, was what would have been the largest pillar ever created at Göbekli Tepe, over 23 feet long and weighing an estimated 60 tons. The carving was nearly complete, detailed relief work already etched into its surface, but for some unknown reason, the builders simply abandoned it. They walked away from months or possibly years of work, leaving behind a stone giant that still lies there today, waiting in the quarry like a forgotten dream. This abandoned pillar tells us something profound about the people of Göbekli Tepe. They weren't desperate survivors scratching out an existence on the margins of the world. They were artists, visionaries, people who could afford to abandon massive projects when they no longer served their purposes. They had the luxury of perfectionism, the confidence to start over when their vision demanded it. This speaks to a level of resource abundance and social stability that shouldn't have existed in the world of 11,000 years ago. And then there are the architectural secrets, hidden within the stone circles themselves. Recent computer analysis by Israeli archaeologists has revealed something that Schmidt himself never realized during his decades of excavation. The circular enclosures at Göbekli Tepe weren't built randomly or developed organically over time. They were planned. Using advanced geometric algorithms, researchers discovered that the entire complex follows a sophisticated master plan, with each circle positioned according to precise, mathematical relationships that suggest the builders possessed knowledge of advanced geometric principles. This planning extends to astronomical alignments that are only now being understood. The site appears to have been oriented according to the position of specific star groups, particularly the constellation we now call the Swan. But here's the crucial detail: the alignments correspond to how these constellations appeared in the sky 11,000 years ago, not today. The builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't just creating pretty pictures on stone, they were mapping the cosmos itself, tracking the movements of celestial bodies with a precision that rivals modern observatories. Consider what this means for our understanding of prehistoric cognition. These people weren't just aware of seasonal changes or the phases of the moon, they were conducting sophisticated astronomical observations that required generational knowledge transfer and mathematical understanding. They were thinking in cosmic terms, seeing themselves as part of a universe that extended far beyond their immediate environment. This is abstract thinking on a level that supposedly didn't develop until the rise of classical civilizations thousands of years later. But perhaps the most enigmatic discovery at Göbekli Tepe is also one of the most recent. In 2019, archaeologists uncovered what they're calling the painted Boar statue, a masterpiece of prehistoric art that defies every assumption about Stone Age capabilities. This isn't just another carved animal relief. This is a three-dimensional sculpture, over 4 feet wide and carefully painted with red, white, and black pigments that have somehow survived 11 millennia buried in the earth. The statue depicts a wild boar in stunning detail, complete with prominent tusks and what appears to be a human head emerging from its mouth. The symbolism is complex and multi-layered, suggesting sophisticated religious or mythological concepts that we can barely begin to interpret. But the technical achievement is what truly staggers the imagination. The sculptors who created this piece possessed skills in three-dimensional carving, pigment preparation, and artistic design that wouldn't look out of place in a Renaissance workshop. Yet they were working with stone tools in an age when most of humanity was still struggling to create basic pottery. The paint itself presents another puzzle. Chemical analysis reveals that the pigments were prepared using techniques that require considerable knowledge of mineral processing and color chemistry. The reds came from iron oxides that had to be heated and ground to achieve the right consistency. The blacks derived from manganese compounds that required careful preparation to bind properly with the stone surface. This wasn't accidental decoration, it was sophisticated artistic technology applied by people who understood the chemistry of color in ways that seem impossible for their supposed level of development. And this painted boar statue wasn't alone. As excavations continue, more painted sculptures are emerging from the earth, each one revealing new levels of artistic sophistication. We're looking at evidence of a prehistoric artistic tradition that rivals the cave paintings of Europe but predates them by thousands of years. These people weren't just survivors, they were creators, innovators, artists who saw beauty as essential enough to dedicate precious resources to its creation. But here's what makes all of this even more mysterious. Göbekli Tepe wasn't abandoned gradually or destroyed by war. Around 8,000 years ago, at the height of its artistic and architectural achievement, the entire complex was deliberately buried. Someone, for reasons we cannot fathom, decided that this masterpiece of prehistoric civilization needed to disappear from the world. They hauled thousands of tons of stone and earth to cover every pillar, every carving, every trace of what had been humanity's first great architectural achievement. This wasn't natural accumulation of sediment over time. This was intentional burial, carried out with the same systematic precision that had characterized the original construction. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe knew exactly what they were doing. They were erasing it from history, ensuring that future generations would never know what had stood on that hilltop. The question that haunts every archaeologist who studies the site is simple. Why would anyone choose to bury paradise? The burial of Göbekli Tepe wasn't just an ending, it was a deliberate act of erasure so complete that it suggests something profound happened in the minds of these ancient people. Imagine the psychological weight of that decision. You're looking at generations of accumulated knowledge, artistic achievement, and spiritual significance, and someone decides it all needs to disappear. This wasn't vandalism or destruction born of conquest. This was methodical, respectful burial, as if the site had become too sacred or too dangerous to remain visible to the world. But before we dive into the theories about why Göbekli Tepe was buried, we need to understand what else has been discovered in the decades since Klaus Schmidt first laid eyes on those weathered stones. Because the more archaeologists excavate, the more they realize that Göbekli Tepe wasn't an isolated phenomenon. It was the crown jewel of an entire prehistoric civilization that stretched across southeastern Turkey. Meet the Taş Tepeler, or Stone Hills, a network of archaeological sites that's rewriting everything we thought we knew about the transition from hunting and gathering to settled civilization. Within a 50-mile radius of Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists have identified more than a dozen related sites, each one revealing new pieces of this prehistoric puzzle. There's Karahan Tepe, with its own massive T-shaped pillars and mysterious underground chambers carved directly into bedrock. There's Sayburç, where excavators recently uncovered over 50 structures dating back 12,600 years, complete with residential areas that prove these weren't just ceremonial centers, people actually lived here. What emerges from these discoveries is a picture of prehistoric society that defies every conventional model of human development. We're looking at a regional network of interconnected communities, each with its own massive stone monuments, sophisticated artwork, and evidence of complex social organization. This wasn't a single anomalous site built by one unusually advanced group. This was an entire civilization operating at a level of sophistication that wasn't supposed to exist for thousands more years. The implications ripple outward like shockwaves through the archaeological community. If these hunter-gatherer societies were capable of coordinating massive construction projects across multiple sites, sharing artistic traditions, and maintaining complex social hierarchies, then our entire framework for understanding prehistoric human development collapses. The neat timeline that places agriculture first then settlement, then monumental architecture, then complex religion, that sequence appears to be completely backwards. Klaus Schmidt himself recognized this paradigm shift. In his later writings, he argued that Göbekli Tepe and its sister sites represented evidence that religion came first, not agriculture. The need to gather regularly for ritual purposes, to house and feed the massive workforces required for construction, to maintain and protect these sacred sites, these religious imperatives, may have been the driving force that pushed humanity towards settled life, not the other way around. Think about what this means for our understanding of human motivation. We've always assumed that people settled down because farming made it practical, that they built temples because they had surplus time and resources after solving the problem of basic survival. But what if the drive to create sacred spaces, to commune with the divine, to build something eternal, was actually the primary motivator? What if humanity's first great leap forward wasn't technological or economic, but spiritual? The evidence is certainly compelling. At Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists have found grinding stones, mortars, and pestles, clear evidence of large-scale food processing that would have been necessary to feed the hundreds of workers involved in construction. They've also discovered what appear to be the world's earliest examples of cultivated einkorn wheat growing in the immediate vicinity of the site. The proximity isn't coincidental. These people may have been experimenting with agriculture specifically to support their religious activities. This turns the traditional narrative on its head. Instead of farming leading to surplus, leading to specialization, leading to monumental architecture, we might be looking at a sequence where the need to build and maintain sacred sites drove the development of agriculture, permanent settlement, and complex social organization. The temple came first, civilization followed. But the mysteries of Göbekli Tepe extend far beyond questions of social organization and agricultural development. Hidden among the carved animals and abstract symbols are images that suggest these people possessed knowledge that shouldn't have been possible given their supposed technological limitations. Take Pillar 43, located in Enclosure D, a massive stone that has become known as the Vulture Stone for its prominent bird carvings. At first glance, Pillar 43 appears to be another example of the site's animal-focused artwork. But look closer, and you'll notice something extraordinary. The arrangement of animals on this pillar isn't random decoration. It appears to be a star map, showing the positions of constellations as they appeared in the sky 11,000 years ago. The vulture represents what we now call Cygnus, the swan. The scorpion below corresponds to Scorpius. The entire composition appears to be documenting a specific moment in astronomical time, with a precision that rivals modern star charts. Dr. Martin Sweatman from the University of Edinburgh has proposed that Pillar 43 might actually be recording the date of a cosmic catastrophe, the impact of comet fragments that triggered the Younger Dryas cooling period around 10,800 years ago. According to his analysis, the symbols carved into the stone aren't just artistic representations. They're a prehistoric attempt to record and commemorate a world-changing event that their ancestors witnessed in the sky. If Sweatman's interpretation is correct, we're looking at humanity's first historical document, a stone record of cosmic events that shaped the development of human civilization. The implications are staggering. These people weren't just passive observers of their environment. They were actively recording astronomical phenomena, tracking celestial cycles, and preserving important information for future generations. They were thinking like scientists, like historians, like people who understood that knowledge needed to be preserved across time. But Pillar 43 holds another secret that's even more disturbing. Carved into the bottom of the stone is an image that doesn't appear anywhere else in the artistic record of Göbekli Tepe, a human figure, clearly male and clearly decapitated. The headless man appears to be positioned deliberately beneath the cosmic scene above, as if connecting human fate to celestial events. Some researchers interpret this as evidence of ritual sacrifice, others as symbolic representation of death and rebirth. But regardless of the specific meaning, the presence of this figure suggests that the builders of Göbekli Tepe understood connections between cosmic events and human destiny that we're only beginning to appreciate. The astronomical knowledge encoded in these pillars extends beyond single monuments. Computer analysis of the entire site reveals that the circular enclosures were positioned according to precise celestial alignments that would have required generations of careful observation to establish. The builders weren't just creating impressive architecture, they were constructing a massive observatory designed to track the movements of celestial bodies across centuries or even millennia. This level of astronomical sophistication raises uncomfortable questions about prehistoric human capabilities. We're looking at evidence of mathematical knowledge, geometric understanding, and observational precision that supposedly didn't develop until the rise of classical civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet here it is, carved in stone and aligned with cosmic precision, created by people who lived at the very dawn of human civilization. And then there's the painted boar statue's deeper mystery. Recent analysis of this remarkable sculpture has revealed details that suggest it might be more than just artistic achievement. It might be a three-dimensional star map. The positioning of painted elements on the boar's surface appears to correspond to specific stellar configurations, while the human head emerging from its mouth might represent the constellation Orion as it appeared during the construction period. If this interpretation proves correct, we're looking at a level of astronomical knowledge that integrated multiple forms of representation, two-dimensional carvings on pillars, three-dimensional sculptures, and architectural alignments, all working together to create a comprehensive cosmic recording system. These people weren't just building a temple, they were constructing a prehistoric computer designed to track and predict celestial events. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery at Göbekli Tepe isn't what's carved into the stones, it's what's missing from them. Despite the incredible artistic sophistication displayed throughout the site, there are virtually no representations of plant life, no agricultural scenes, no images of domestic activities. The artistic focus is almost exclusively on wild animals, cosmic symbols, and abstract geometric patterns. It's as if the builders were deliberately documenting a world that was disappearing, preserving images of wild creatures and natural forces before they were replaced by human civilization. This absence becomes even more significant when we consider the timeline. Göbekli Tepe was constructed during the transition period when humanity was first experimenting with agriculture and animal domestication. The site's builders were living through one of the most important transformations in human history, yet their art focuses obsessively on the wild world they were leaving behind. Were they mourning the end of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle? Were they trying to preserve something essential about human nature that they feared would be lost in the transition to settled life? The deliberate burial of the site around 8,000 years ago takes on new meaning in this context. By the time Göbekli Tepe was covered with earth, the surrounding region had become fully agricultural. Permanent settlements dotted the landscape. Domestic animals had replaced wild herds. The world of the hunter-gatherers was gone, replaced by something entirely new. Perhaps the burial of Göbekli Tepe represented a final acknowledgement that the old world had ended, that the connection between humans and the natural cosmos had been severed by the demands of civilized life. But the mystery doesn't end with burial, because even as Göbekli Tepe disappeared beneath tons of earth and stone, its influence continued to ripple outward through human culture. The T-shaped pillars that characterize the site begin appearing in archaeological contexts throughout the Middle East and beyond. The artistic motifs carved into its stones show up in later civilizations across the ancient world. The astronomical knowledge encoded in its monuments appears to have been preserved and transmitted through secret traditions that influenced the development of religion, science, and architecture for thousands of years. We're looking at evidence that the builders of Göbekli Tepe didn't just vanish when their great temple was buried, they dispersed. carrying their knowledge and traditions to distant lands where they seeded the development of later civilizations. The mystery of Göbekli Tepe isn't just about what happened 11,000 years ago. It's about how the knowledge and wisdom of these prehistoric people continued to shape human development long after their monuments disappeared from sight. And this brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of Göbekli Tepe, the growing body of evidence that suggests these ancient builders possessed knowledge that was supposedly lost to humanity for millennia. Take the precision of their stonework, for example. When modern engineers examine the joints between massive pillars, they find tolerances that would be impressive even by today's standards. Stones weighing dozens of tons fit together so perfectly that you can't slide a knife blade between them. This isn't the work of people randomly stacking rocks. This is evidence of sophisticated understanding of structural engineering, load distribution, and architectural planning. But it goes deeper than mere construction within the geometric technique. Hidden layouts of the circular enclosures are mathematical relationships that shouldn't have been discovered for thousands more years. The golden ratio appears repeatedly in the proportions of pillar arrangements. Complex geometric theorems seem to be embedded in the site's design. We're looking at people who understood advanced mathematics not as abstract concepts, but as practical tools for creating sacred architecture that would endure across millennia. The more researchers study these mathematical relationships, the more impossible they become to explain using conventional models of prehistoric development. These weren't accidental discoveries or lucky guesses. They represent systematic knowledge that would have required generations to develop and refine. Somewhere in the mists of prehistory, there existed schools of learning, traditions of knowledge, transmission, and intellectual achievements that rivaled anything produced by later civilizations. And then there's the question of the symbols themselves. Scattered throughout Göbekli Tepe are abstract markings that don't appear to represent animals or objects from the natural world. Instead, they seem to be pure symbols, geometric forms, complex patterns, arrangements of lines and curves that suggest some form of symbolic communication system. Are we looking at humanity's first attempt at written language? Not the pictographic systems that would develop thousands of years later, but something more sophisticated, a symbolic notation system capable of recording complex abstract concepts. Dr. Harold Hauptmann, who worked alongside Klaus Schmidt during the early excavations, has identified over 400 distinct symbols across the various pillars and structures. Many appear repeatedly in different contexts, suggesting they carried specific meanings that were understood by the builders. Others seem to be variations on common themes, as if they represented different aspects of the same fundamental concepts. The pattern suggests not random decoration, but systematic symbolic communication writing in its most primitive but recognizable form. If these markings do represent early writing, they push the development of symbolic communication back by thousands of years. We're not just talking about simple pictographs or basic record keeping. Some of these symbols appear to represent abstract concepts that would have required sophisticated cognitive development to conceive and communicate. The builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't just creating art, they were developing the fundamental tools of human knowledge transmission. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Göbekli Tepe isn't what it tells us about prehistoric capabilities, it's what it suggests about historical continuity. Because if these people possessed such advanced knowledge, what happened to it? How did humanity apparently forget architectural techniques, mathematical principles, and astronomical observations that wouldn't be rediscovered until classical antiquity? The conventional model suggests steady progress from primitive to sophisticated, but Göbekli Tepe presents evidence of sophistication followed by apparent regression, a pattern that challenges our most basic assumptions about human development. Consider the implications. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe understood advanced engineering, possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, and developed early forms of written communication, then human civilization didn't begin with the first farmers in Mesopotamia. It began thousands of years earlier with people who built monuments that still challenge our understanding today. The question becomes, what happened to that knowledge? Was it deliberately suppressed? Did it survive in hidden traditions that influenced later developments? Or was it simply lost when the old world ended and the age of agriculture began? The burial of Göbekli Tepe takes on new significance in this context. Perhaps it wasn't just the end of a religious site. Perhaps it was the end of an entire knowledge tradition that had become incompatible with the emerging agricultural world. The people who covered those magnificent pillars with earth might have been performing a funeral for human wisdom itself, acknowledging that certain types of knowledge couldn't survive the transition to settled civilization. Yet traces of that lost wisdom seem to echo through later cultures in ways that are only now being recognized. The T-shaped pillar design appears in modified form in ancient Mesopotamian architecture. The astronomical alignments pioneered at Göbekli Tepe show up in Egyptian pyramids and Greek temples. The symbolic motifs carved into those prehistoric stones resurface in religious iconography across multiple civilizations. It's as if the knowledge of Göbekli Tepe didn't die with its burial. It went underground, preserved in secret traditions and esoteric schools that influenced human development from the shadows. This hidden influence becomes particularly apparent when we examine the religious traditions that emerged in the region after Göbekli Tepe's burial. The major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all trace their origins to this same geographical area. Their creation myths, astronomical references, and architectural symbolism show remarkable similarities to elements found at Göbekli Tepe. Are we looking at coincidence, or are we seeing evidence that the spiritual insights pioneered by the builders of the world's first temple continued to shape human consciousness long after their monuments disappeared? So here we stand, 11,000 years later, staring into the eyes of stone creatures carved by people who shouldn't have existed. The dust has settled, the excavations continue, and yet Göbekli Tepe refuses to give up its deepest secrets. Every answer we uncover spawns 10 new questions. Every breakthrough reveals 10 new mysteries. Every carved symbol whispers of knowledge we're only beginning to comprehend. Klaus Schmidt spent 20 years of his life trying to understand what he'd found on that Turkish hilltop, and when he died in 2014, the site had revealed only 5% of its secrets. Today, as new technologies probe beneath the earth and computer algorithms decode astronomical alignments, we're forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. We may never fully understand what our ancestors accomplished in those distant hills, but perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was meant to remain partially hidden, partially revealed, a riddle carved in stone that forces each generation to confront its own assumptions about human capability, about the nature of civilization, about the very meaning of progress itself. The people who built it understood something we've forgotten, that true knowledge isn't just about accumulating facts, but about preserving mystery, maintaining wonder, keeping alive the questions that make us human. As you lie in bed tonight, remember that somewhere in southeastern Turkey, massive stone pillars still sleep beneath the earth, waiting for future archaeologists to brush away the dust of millennia. Remember that carved vultures still watch the sky with hollow eyes, tracking constellations that wheeled overhead when the world was young. Remember that painted boars still guard their secrets in chambers that haven't seen sunlight since your ancestors first learned to plant seeds. And remember this: if our hunter-gatherer forebears could look up at the stars and decide to build something eternal, if they could organize themselves into communities capable of moving 50-ton stones and carving cosmic maps into limestone pillars, if they could create beauty so profound that it still takes our breath away 11,000 years later, then what excuse do we have for thinking small? The mystery of Göbekli Tepe isn't just about the past, it's about the future. It's about remembering that humans are capable of things that defy explanation, that challenge assumptions, that force us to expand our understanding of what's possible. In a world that sometimes feels limited by its own cynicism, Göbekli Tepe stands as proof that our ancestors refused to accept limitations, and maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't either.